Serna. I'm one of the co-founders of Right Submission. Just by way of background, I spent about 17 years working at a boutique consulting company, building and regulatory and clinical strategies for medical device companies, and spent a lot of time doing submissions, what we now call the old-fashioned way, Word, templates, Excel, Dropbox, SharePoint, and Liz was with me at that time, and we decided, hey, there's a better way of doing this. So we started Right Submission to basically create a TurboTax product-like product for 510K submissions. We have a 510K submission platform, CER and CSR, and a couple more under development.
And I'm Liz FitzGerald. I, as Serna said, worked with him at our previous boutique consulting firm, and sort of was the data manager at that company. And so I've taken my sort of data perspective and tried to apply that to a 510K to eliminate redundancies and sort of use structured data to John was very, very nice in saying it's a 510K button. It's a little bit more involved in that, but we definitely tried to sort of streamline and create efficiencies in your 510K workflow.
So how many of you have ever put together a 510K? Okay. How many of you have a 510K that you'll be involved with, let's say, in this next 6 months? And then how many this year? Right. So just for those of you that didn't see the entire audience, there was about, I would say probably about 10% of you, maybe 20% of you have been a part of putting together a 510K before. As Juan Carlos and Liz can attest, if you've done it the old-fashioned way, which probably most of you have, unless your customer is a Right Submission, if you've done it the old-fashioned way, there's a lot of pain and suffering that goes into that. A lot of pain and suffering. And it's because the old-fashioned way is very archaic, it's very, very mundane. And I'll talk to you, and Liz and Juan Carlos will talk to you a little bit about some of the nuances of putting together a 510K. There is a script, so to speak, of what would be expected to a 510K, but there is also some art. So, you know, knowing how to follow the script and when to follow the script versus knowing when to be the artist is important. And there are some things about FDA process in general on the topic of 510K that have been evolving over the past 5 years. And so understanding that process is key. Now, I know some of you are just now working. How many of you are working on your first 510K ever in your life? And it's okay if you are. All right. So it is. I know 510K can be confusing, and it's like this. Like angels are going to start like singing and playing harps when you submit that to the FDA. I wish it were like that. But I want you to leave today. I know Liz and Juan Carlos want you to leave today with a better understanding what is a 510K, understand a little bit more about what the process is, because I think sometimes that term is thrown around a little bit loosely to mean a few different things. So I want you to have a clear understanding of what that means. A lot of companies use 510K submission and or clearance as milestones for fundraising purposes, and maybe some of you are in that situation. So, know what you're up against and know what it means. And I've got a couple stories, and I want you both, when you have stories, share the stories. Okay? Just don't shut up. So the first story that I share is, I had a company call me a few years ago, and they said, I got 510K clearance. Oh, good for you. But I don't know what a QMS, and I don't know what design controls are, and I don't know what risk. And I'm like, how do you do a 510K without that? So I won't go down that story, but let me just suffice it to say that do yourself a favor. If you are in that boat and you're working on a 510K, you should have a little bit of a QMS in place at least. You should be building your design history file, and you should be establishing your risk management file. And part of what we're going to talk about today is where the design controls and risk, how do they play into your 510K. I can't imagine. Personally speaking, I don't see how you could build a 510K without that information. Now, clearly it happens, and it happens every day. But, just bear that in mind. It's important to understand, as we're in this process of a 510K, what it is, who's involved, why it is a thing, and that sort of thing. And sometimes we have to understand who the other stakeholders are. So in the 510K scenario, the biggest stakeholder that we're working with is the FDA. I know sometimes FDA, I'm just curious, does anybody from the FDA happen to be here today? I think the FDA is our friend. Now, not all of you, and I would say that if they were here or not here. So, sometimes the FDA doesn't, it's been a contentious relationship between medical device company or industry and FDA through the history of time. I think we're in a period of time where the FDA is a much more kinder, gentler, more collaborative entity than they ever have been. I started in the medical device industry, and when it came time to do the 510K, we didn't communicate anything to FDA. We just submitted it, and we crossed our fingers, and we hoped that we didn't get questions. But there was no dialogue, there was no communication, there was no collaboration. That's not the agency that we're working with today. And I know that Right Submission probably can speak a little bit to that.
You're absolutely right. It's changed a lot. It used to be you used to load up the truck, dump a bunch of information their way, and hope that they would drown within their 90 days to give you approval. Those days are also over, so it's really up to us as industry to provide documents and sections that are easily digestible, that they understand. If they're not going to understand them, toss them ahead of time. Pilot tests your writing with outside people who aren't as invested in your technology. Make sure it's clear to other people what you're describing. And the easier you make it for the reviewer, the less painful the review process is going to be. We'll jump back in a second. You mentioned how can you possibly do a 510K without design controls? It happens all the time. But what people need to understand is that 50% of your answers to FDA when they come back with questions are going to rely on your design specs to say we met our design spec, here it is, here's the risk assessment related to that specification. And a lot of times that's a winning strategy versus, I don't know, we just did it that way.
It's a really good point. I heard a story once, true or false, I'm not sure, but a company said that they had a weight requirement for the paper that was part of their 510K, and it had to meet a certain weight threshold before it was FDA ready. So what they were doing was making sure that it weighed, a certain a number of pounds before they would send it. And I'm not making this up. I mean, Juan Carlos, the adage used to be, send more paper, right? Send more paper. It had to be a number of pages. I mean, I worked on a 510K once that was 750 pages. I mean, did it need to be? I don't know, but that was what we did. So, anyway, what is it? Maybe some of you are sitting here today and you're wondering, what is a medical device? Does 510K apply? And so I want to spend a moment or two giving you a little bit of background about that. The FDA authority, there's links to different regulations, guidance, documents, and so on. But basically, the whole premise behind a 510K is that I'm demonstrating that my product is substantially equivalent to something that's already on the market. And theoretically, that something on the market should have a lineage that traces back to before the Medical Devices Act of 1976. And that's theoretically, because it's a hypothetical question, but if I have a smartphone app that's doing whatever, how in the world can I trace that back to something that's pre-1976, pre-amendment, as they say? That's the basic premise of the clause. And I think we're seeing a 510K interpretation or a 510K adherence has been evolving quite a bit. It's kind of a love-hate thing, at least in my experience. Like sometimes you hear industry say, I wish there was a simpler path, I wish that this could happen, and so on. And there was a lady earlier that was in a session talking about pharmaceutical. You think our path is hard in med device, talk to the pharmaceutical industry and find out how easy we really have it. But love or hate, or like or dislike, 510K, it's the workhorse of getting the medical device industry, getting products through FDA processes so that you can go to market. And that's the key thing. It is a gateway for Class 2 products for you to be able to go to market. Okay? Now, I'm not going to be super nitpicky today, but sometimes you'll hear somebody say something like 510K approval. Okay, technically speaking, it's 510K clearance. You don't get approval for a 510K. Class 3 PMA is an approval. So what FDA is doing during their 510K review process is you are presenting the case that my product is substantially equivalent to something else that's already been cleared by FDA. So they're not approving it. It's rare, although becoming more common, for a medical device that goes through the 510K path to have clinical evidence, actual clinical use. That is a rare thing. Most products that go through the 510K path just through bench testing, sometimes, and that's it. It doesn't require that you have clinicals. Now, I know some of you are like, oh, we need clinicals, we need that first in man, because that too is also an important fundable milestone, and that's fine. There are some different things that you should consider, like you may have to do an IDE, and you may have to go through an IRB, and I'm going to rattle off a whole bunch of acronyms today, and as will my colleagues as well. So there are acronyms that we say that I don't know what that means. Please do raise your hand, okay? So sometimes people have 510K. Is that like a 401K? Well, for some of you it might be. I don't know. I don't know how big the product is, but it might be. But it is actually a specific part of the regulations. It's a provision that's in the regulation, and I don't get too hung up on it. But importantly, I want you to know what can you do, where do you go, how do you do something about it, and the FDA website it's got good information, but it's not very user friendly. So I don't know if you have any tricks or tips for how to navigate FDA website.
We've actually built some shells on top of FDA's data assumptions because it's so user-friendly.
Yeah. But there are lots of guidances. There are lots of information about 510K. Again, there's a couple of links that are here to help eliminate or reduce some of your frustration trying to navigate FDA website. But there is information about preparing a 510K. I've never called this number, but I know that theoretically, generally speaking, once you get into a reviewer, you're going to have a direct contact with your reviewer. A couple other things that I think is important is how many of you already have products that are on the market? So when you make a change, and how many of those products on the market are already 510K cleared? Yeah. So when you make a change, what do you do? How do you know whether or not you need to do a new 510K? Do you have some sort of decision tree? Do you have some sort of evaluation process? Did you know that the FDA guidance document on this topic recently changed? Yeah. So it's not all that different. So the original guidance document when deciding when to make a change to a 510K cleared product was published in 1997. And it was actually just revised late last year. But there's a process that you need to go through. If you're going to make a change to a product, it may require a new 510K. So, and I didn't feel like this thing was on, but because I started using my dad voice. Can you all hear me if I talk like this? No. So I need to use my dad voice. Okay. So there's a decision process that you need to go through when you change a product that's already been 510K cleared. It's possible that when you make that change, that it could require a new 510K. Now, the new 510K may not be a traditional 510K. It may be a special or an abbreviated 510K, but you might have to communicate something to the agency. Now, the good news is that this guidance document, it's not a bad guidance document. It's actually pretty good. And there are decision trees that are built into the guidance documents. And, okay, it's not black and white. It's not going to lead. It's not always going to be 100% crystal clear, but it gives you a framework to make risk-based decision about changes that you're making to your 510K product as to whether or not you need to do additional 510K submission or communication to the FDA. So do leverage the workflows that are defined in these guidance documents to your benefit. Because if you make a change to something that required a 510K, and you didn't submit a new 510K, that's not a good thing. You know, it's just not. You have an FDA inspection, because if you have a Class 2 device or higher, that means you're open to FDA inspection. And even, got news for you, even if you make a Class 1 device, FDA is, I've heard a lot of stories about companies that all they make are Class 1 devices. FDA inspections are starting to happen to them too. Okay, again, we are making medical devices, but you'll need to corroborate your story about all your changes. And that's one of the, who has been through an FDA inspection? All right, so for those of you who haven't, let me paint a very high-level picture. Your FDA inspector shows up. One of the first things they're going to dive into are your complaints, your CAPAs, and then they're going to look at all the products that are registered with the agency. They're going to make sure, they're going to follow that path. They're going to make sure that the classification or the 510K clearance or PMA or whatever have all, there's proof and evidence of that. And for those things that are PMA or 510K, or Class 2, Class 3 type products, if you've made changes, they're gonna scrutinize, they're gonna evaluate those changes and make sure that you made the right decisions about whether or not it needed a communication to the FDA.
So I'm just gonna add a couple things. I would echo what John said. I would much rather have a discussion with an FDA reviewer about a difference of opinion as to how I answered one of those triangles than not having any documentation whatsoever on a design change. Risk of FDA inspection, but also strategics and partners, they're going to be giving you just as much of an inspection than FDA does, and they're going to want to see this so that they don't inherit the risks that you've accumulated. And the last point is take the time to look at the effect of incremental changes, because each change by itself might not necessitate a new 510K, but if you made 20 changes over the last 3 years, especially in the digital health area, it might change your overall thinking. So look at the immediate change and then look at the historical changes to date when you're making these determinations.
Really, really good points. And you want to talk about design change? Sometimes I think people hear that term and they think, oh, that's just a design control change that I focus on during the product development process. Not exactly. If I make a change even after I do design transfer, that is potentially a design change. Right? So this is design control is a total product lifecycle process. So if I make one change to a product, I have to understand the design control ramifications, the risk ramifications, the regulatory ramifications, and I should keep my design control traceability matrix fluid and up to date and current with my product as it evolves and changes. But Juan Carlos is right. At some point in time, I may be 3, 4, 5, 10 changes down the road, and it could have shifted that product very dramatically from what I had cleared and stated within my 510K. So I would encourage you to do periodic reviews of your products to make sure that you're staying in alignment with your clearance. So there is a decision tree that the FDA uses as well. As much as there are guidance documents for us in industry, FDA also has guidance documents for FDA reviewers, FDA inspectors, and so on. And there's actually, and this is all public domain information, so go there and check it out. But there's a guidance that is for the FDA staff, and they also have a decision-making flowchart that they go through to evaluate whether or not this is a 510K type product and that sort of thing. So in all of these cases, and I'm going to touch on the refuse to accept checklist here in a moment, but in all these cases, use this information to your benefit. Right? The beautiful thing about the 510K process is FDA has defined what it is. They've told you it contains these 20 sections. Here's what we expect in each of these 20 sections. Now, there is, like I said, there's a process and there's some art, and we'll talk about the art, of course, as well. But at least do yourself a favor and don't be surprised about the 20 sections of the 510K. Do yourself a favor, don't be surprised about the criteria that FDA is going to use to evaluate your submission. Don't be surprised of specific format requirement. I mean, there's some weird, quirky things about preparing a 510K that have nothing to do with what is contained within the 510K. Like e-copy. Oh my goodness. There are some really weird things that are that are kind of head scratchers that, if you don't know, you'll get rejected. Like the name of the file, the eCopy file, the size of the eCopy file, just some really simple things. And so set yourself up for success, because the majority of the reasons why 510Ks get rejected are 100% in your control. Some crazy statistic, like 75% of 510Ks get rejected because the indications for use statement is not consistent throughout the submission. Okay? And this is some of the pain. If you've ever put together a 510K, these are the 20 sections, and some of them, it's a little hard to see, but they're italicized and underlined, and I'm going to touch on the reason for why they're italicized and underlined. But there are data elements, there's information that may repeat itself throughout your entire submission. Indications for use statement is a good one, because this statement will be repeated usually in the 510K summary. It's usually in the executive summary. It's usually in the device description. I'm probably leaving off a few other bits. It's in the cover sheet. So it's in a handful of places throughout your 510K. Now, I know it seems none of you will ever make this mistake. I know. But I've looked at a lot of 510Ks. Somebody will send the submission to me, and they'll ask for my comment. It is, and they have a different statement in each section. Like its words are different. It's like, how can that be? And is that a big deal? Yeah, it's a big deal, because that statement is the whole basis for your 510K argument. So it's going to be in multiple places. Do yourself a favor. Make sure it is verbatim, word for word, exactly the same everywhere where it's referenced. I know you think that I'm maybe beating a dead horse here, but I'll tell you that's one of the biggest reasons why a 510K gets rejected. All right, so I underlined sections 4, 5, 9 through 20 for a reason. Because, I told you a bit ago that I couldn't understand how somebody could build a 510K and not have design controls. In my opinion, sections 4, 5, 9 through 20 contain design control and risk management information. Indications for use. It's the whole reason why we do the design and development of our product to begin with. There is some clinical need that we're trying to solve. And so that kicks off us defining user needs. 510K summary, you're summarizing what it is that your product is all about. And so, it's granted it may be high level, but there's some information from a design control perspective, like some of the safety testing that we've done and that sort of thing, that are going to find its way into that 510K summary. Declaration of conformity and summary reports. If I do electrical safety testing for IEC 60601, that is a design verification activity that I'm going to declare that I'm conforming to that standard. If I do biocompatibility per ISO 10993, that is a design verification activity that I'm demonstrating that I'm safe, right? So, seeing a couple of looks on people's faces, like I'm either causing them to think or they're disagreeing. Anybody have any questions or comments? And it's a disagreement with me. I'm happy to talk about it. No comments? Yes?
No, just a question. Are you going to go through 18 to 20? You've underlined them, so I assume you're... Yeah,
I'm gonna walk down the items that are underlined, just to give you some perspective of how design controls and risk are impacted in some of these areas. I don't know how specific I'll get in each of these areas. Is there a specific question that you have about 18 through 20?
Just the requirements, like when they're required, and
okay.
And if they are, then they should be following ICH guidelines, which are international guidelines. So is that incorporated into the 510K, that's also an additional requirement, or that it references other standards?
All right, so let me restate what you're asking and make sure I understand your question. So you're asking about Section 18, performance testing bench, Section 19, performance testing animal, and Section 20.
It's more 19 and 20, when they're required.
When are they required?
And if so, how far does the FDA go to make sure that they're done according to ICH guidelines? I mean, if they wanted to get nitpicky, they could on those areas.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Take a stab at it, you can fill it in. It's going to vary by product. Different products have different performance standards and guidances that FDA publishes on what they expect to see for that product code. So the first thing I would do is take your product, search for applicable performance guidance on FDA's website. Then I would look at your predicates, all that you can get a hold of and see what they've done, because there's a whole level playing field aspect of FDA reviews. So if they made your competitor do XYZ testing, guess what? You're doing XYZ testing unless you can really show how many reason not to. In terms of the standards, in terms of the GLP ICH standards, yeah, pretty much you're going to be subject to GLP for animal-derived samples that you're using, and for clinical, yeah. Now, every time FDA asks for data, they say, please provide this data or a justification as to why you don't need it. Maybe people are better at writing justifications than I am, but oftentimes it really means give us the data or a very good surrogate for that data point.
The other thing that I would add is if there is, so determining your product code, 3-letter product code, generally speaking, not always, but will give you some level of information about whether or not there is a guidance document that relates to your product, whether or not there are consensus standards that relate to that, and help you identify, as Juan Carlos said, possible predicates that relate to your product. The other, and we're not going to talk a lot about it in this session today, but another vehicle that I would encourage you, if you have some confusion or some questions about this, to consider is what's called a pre-submission. All right, pre-submission is so useful today, and I know I believe Mike Drews is from Vascular Sciences, either later today or tomorrow or in the next couple of days, has a workshop on pre-submissions. I would encourage you to go to that. Pre-submission is a vehicle for me to ask questions to the FDA, and so I would leverage that as well. But since we're on 18, 19, and 20, this is like the culmination of everything that you do from a design control standpoint. This is all of our design verification activities. In some cases, design validation activities are captured in those 3 sections. All right. Let me say it another way. If I do formal testing that I'm submitting to FDA as part of my 510K to demonstrate that my product works, and I'm not in a state of design control, I have things out of order. Now, Juan Carlos, Liz, they see it all the time, and they are correct. Doesn't mean that people do this all the time out of order. Doesn't mean that I would recommend or advise that. You know, you're going to have to mitigate and update your design history file at some point in time. My experience is it's easier to do it as you're going through the process rather than after the fact. I mean, what happens when you get clearance? You think that your boss is going to say, okay, now go back and fix your design history file? Maybe. Maybe. Device description. This is like, sometimes it includes schematics and drawings and detailed information, because remember what the 510K really is you're communicating enough information to an FDA reviewer about what it is that you're doing. You're building the case for why your product is substantially equivalent to something else. So you have to provide enough information in the submission so that the person or people reviewing the 510K have enough information there. And this is part of that art. You know, do you give them all of your drawings, all of your specifications? No, probably not. But you have to give them enough so they know what to do about it. Labeling, substantial equivalence discussion. You know, you're making the case for the things that you've done, the testing, the analysis, the inspection of what you've done, how that corroborates the story about complying or aligning with the predicate that you've chosen, or predicates that you've chosen. Labeling, so important, is an output. Product labeling is a design output, right? It describes what your product information, you know, UDI is a big thing these days. Everybody having fun with UDI? Not a very good joke, sorry. But that's important. Sterilization, shelf life. Again, these are design verification activities. Biocompatibility, a design verification activity. And you notice that, like with section 14, 15, and 16, and even 17, these are all really subsets of some type of performance testing, but they're very specific cases. And you notice that they're called out: biocompatibility, sterilization, software, that sort of thing, electromagnetic compatibility. These are areas that have surfaced from an FDA standpoint. These are higher profile areas. One other thing I'll say about those areas, it used to be like early on in my career, when we put together a 510K, for like biocompatibility or for shelf life or even for EMC, we can put in an I promise statement. Anybody written an I promise statement? Anybody know what I'm talking about, an I promise? All right, some of you may not. So we may do a submission. So I'll pick on one example. Electromagnetic compatibility, it can be 12 weeks, it can be longer testing. It's a long type of test sometimes, and it can be very trying and very challenging. I may think that I got it, and then I go to the formal test, and I zap the only prototype that I have. Right? So some of these they're all long lead time, they're very expensive, they're very time consuming. I may have everything else ready except for one or two of these items. So I used to be allowed where I could write an I promise statement. I can say, yeah, we have this started. We promise to complete this testing before we go to market. And FDA used to allow that. Now, I assure you that today they do not allow that. Don't submit your 510K with an I promise statement. Do not do it. I mean, talked about risk-based QMS in the earlier session. This is one of those risks. You can take the risk, and I bet that it gets rejected. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or experience on that.
No, I agree. The best you can do is, for example, biocompatibility, like degradation studies, for example. If you don't have 100% degradation yet, but you know the review cycle is going to be 90 days to 180 days, submit what you have. The question will come back during interactive review, and then you can submit the response. You got to be right though.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
And then, sorry, one common question we get on this area is the need to test finish the final product. So it's really tough because sometimes you don't have your manufacturing up to scale, so you're not really manufacturing exactly how you're going to be producing commercially. Technically speaking, FDA wants you to go through the whole manufacturing process, sterilization, packing, and then test. Just be ready as you plan out your verification activities. Just be prepared to justify any gaps between what you're testing and what your finished final product is going to be, and how they may or may not affect the test results.
Really good points. All right, so thought that we'd share kind of this graphic and kind of walk through what happened. So we went through very high level. I know that you may have some very specific questions about some of the 20 sections, what that entails. In a few moments, Liz and Juan Carlos are going to kind of talk you through kind of step by step what that looks like and putting that together. So it would be an opportunity to ask some very specific questions. So I want to get through some of the background information just to give you some idea of process so that you know what to expect. So submit your 510K. FDA is going to receive it. You're probably going to ship it to them overnight. Interestingly, it's one of those areas where it's still a paper copy is required. Yeah.
Technically speaking, the regulations still say you need a paper copy. You do not have to do a paper copy anymore. You put in your cover letter, exact copy except for one of the first X pages that we printed. Print through your cover letter if you use our format, and that will work. In private sessions with FDA, that paper copy goes right into the shredder. You just take your e-copy and load that up into their system. And we've had clients get confirmation right from FDA because they didn't believe us, which is okay. But so for 510Ks, you don't need to do a paper copy anymore.
But I can tell you a story a few years ago, and maybe some of you can relate, because this is one of those art things, and speak to a Picasso about putting together 510Ks. Don't do it the way that I did. We had an objective. I was working for a startup. I got there early in the morning, and I was there till 8 o'clock at night. And thankfully, a couple of people that worked there were willing to stay late. But I wasn't doing anything but formatting and pagination and tabs in a paper copy. That's the only thing I was doing. And it took weeks, preparation and organization. I'm a very organized person. I had it all structured and organized to make the FedEx day the easy day, and I was there all day. And it was easy, right? So this is the PIA type activity that none of us in this room thinks adds value. I mean, who thinks that it's valuable to go to FedEx, Kinko's, or your copy room just to mess around with tabs and adding page numbers and filing? If you do, I mean, well, anyway. So you submitted the 510K to FDA. There's this new thing, or new word thing, I guess it's been around for a few years, where FDA has their RTA, or refuse to accept. And it's kind of interesting to me because some people, it's kind of love-hate that I hear from people about the RTA. I personally like it because, again, I told you early on in my career, we used to throw it over the wall when we submitted our 510K and we crossed our fingers and we waited. But now, even if I don't encourage that approach, but if that is your approach, within the first 2 weeks, you're going to get some feedback from the FDA. They're going to say, yes, we heard you, we got your submission. Yes, we have accepted your 510K, meaning we have reviewed it and it contains the information that we expect, and now we're sending it on to the substantive review. Or, no, you're missing information, right? So if it's refused, you'll get communication. Even if it's accepted, they send you a note on that too. But it is 15 days, and they're very good about hitting that timeline. They're very good about hitting that timeline. And then what happens is then it gets into the substantive review, which is somewhere around day 60-ish. I mean, some of these dates they're fuzzy. They're not absolutes. And I've got a chart here. I'll show you a little bit on it, because I remember that I worked with a company a few years ago and never been through the 510K process. And he's like, well, our device should take less than 90 days to get cleared from the 510K. And I kind of laughed at him, and he didn't like that. Because it's rare to have a 510K get from the moment you submit it to the moment you get cleared, that it actually take 90 days or less. How many of you have had a 510K take 90 days or less? Traditional. All right. You've had some experience as well. But this is part of knowing the process, knowing the structure, knowing the format, and knowing enough about the art where you can set yourself up for success.
Just want to clarify the time stops.
You go ahead.
All right, just go back one slide. So John keeps alluding to a 90-day clock. That's how much statutorily FDA has to make a decision on your submission. Technically speaking, if they don't get back to you within 90 days, you can assume it's cleared, but don't do that. Something got lost in the mail. But if they ask questions during that 60-day period, there's two types of questions. There's interactive questions. That means the clock keeps going. They're minor, they're easy to resolve, or they're more substantial on the other chart. That stops the clock. You then have 180 days to respond to those questions. You reply, the clock starts again. And I think now they only let you do one of those cycles.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so
additional information. Thank you.
Yeah, so you used to, like, if they had questions, there could be several, you go back and forth, but now you get one time to get it right. Now they give you 180 days, but understanding what it is that they're asking, because if FDA asked you a question and you knew what they were going to ask, you probably would have provided that information in the submission. So sometimes these questions, they are, like, I worked on a device that was a home use device, electromechanical product, had to go through certain aspects of 60601. And they were asking something about, if it was ambulatory use, and there were some new versions of standards that were draft, they weren't even published yet, that had higher thresholds of testing, and they wanted to know if we had tested that. Not something we anticipated. So usually there are questions that you didn't think of. All right, so new device, submit your 510K. There's a format, as I talked about a moment ago. There's a user fee, and the user fee actually went up. It almost doubled this past year for 510Ks for the standard fee. To submit a 510K, you got to pay money. You got to pay about $10,000 unless you're a small business. Small business has not changed that much. It's like $2,600. And small business, in the terms of FDA, I think it's sub 100 million. It's a pretty big threshold for being a small business. So most of your companies probably qualify for being a small business, but do let that up. Obviously, if you file as a small business, it is substantial savings for your company.
And I will just point out that it does take up to 60 days to get that small business designation from FDA, and you can't submit your 510K until you have that SPD in hand. So if you're planning on submitting a 510K, it's good for a year, so might as well get that designation earlier.
Yeah, but don't assume that you're going to get that SPD designation in 2 days because you're submitting next week. So do realize it takes some time. All right, yeah.
Just want to tell everybody what it costs for a PMA.
A PMA, yeah. So I can't remember the current.
300.
As I say, it's 300,000 for a PMA.
On the light end.
No, just from a fee for just the regulatory fee alone, 300,000.
But your first one is free, so.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Or there's thresholds of company sizes, but yeah.
And then there's de novo, which is a different user fee. I can't remember what that is.
90-ish?
Yeah, as I say, 93. That was the number that stuck in my head. So I know some people want to be novel and unique, and they want to go down the de novo path and that sort of thing. So just keep in mind there are fees associated with this. These are not free things. The 510K is still the most economical way. It may not make the most business sense. I know there was some conversation earlier about risk to business, and this is one of those things where how you're classified, the path, the market, those sorts of things are all factors.
I'm not sure we said, so 510K is about 10,000 now, and if you're a small business, it's about 2,500 for the user fee to FDA due upon submission. So the first page or so of your submission is your receipt that you paid that.
Yeah.
What's the street pay?
About 300,000 for a PMA for if you don't follow. De novo about 90,000.
So do they give breaks to startups? I mean, that's a lot for a startup.
And that's part of the small business designation.
But wouldn't a lot of startups go the de novo because they're developing something completely new?
Yeah. This is reminding us that the first de novo is also free. Also, depending on the review divisions from the FDA vary a lot in terms of their mindset and their people. Some of them will bend over backwards to keep you out of de novo and put you back into a 510K, which is, I think, a helpful thing. Because the path to a 510K is a lot well known. People, the reviewers know how to do it. They have it, it's machining. They do 3,500 a year. De novo, I think they do about 90 or so, 120 or so a year. So it's more of a meandering path.
Yeah, and again, this is a wonderful opportunity for a pre-submission because you can use the pre-submission as a vehicle to talk about that path with FDA. And Juan Carlos is right that the beautiful thing about the pre-submission is you may not get the exact person who's going to review your eventual submission, but you might. And you start to build a rapport and a relationship with the actual reviewers of 510Ks and de novos and a pre-submission in a way that, FDA wants your product to be safe. They want your product to clear. They take great pride in your product getting through the regulatory process because they know that what you're doing is trying to help patients. So, they're humans too. They're people too. They take great pride in this process. So they're trying to figure out the least burdensome path. I know it doesn't always feel that way, but again, I'm telling you that FDA today, a much different entity than 15 or even 10 years ago. All right, so once you submit, you're going to go through this, the day 15, the refuse to accept. Now, there is a guidance document. Highly encourage you to follow this. This is one of those guidance documents that is specifically written for the FDA reviewer, more so than it is for us as medical device industry. However, it's available to you, and it tells you how that refuse to accept thing is going to happen. There is a checklist that is in that standard. Use that checklist. Fill it out. Use it to compile your 510K. Include that refuse to accept checklist as part of your 510K, showing what page number where each one of these things is identified. Give that reviewer information so that you can help set yourself up for success. You'd be surprised if you don't do it. You're like, it's in that, and they send back the checklist. They're going to send back this checklist filled out with their information and any comments. And you're like, I know it's in there. Okay, but did you show them where it was? Remember, this first step is not, it's more about does the 510K contain the information that I would expect as this 510K? It's not getting into the substantive part per se, although I've been through a couple of RTA questions that seem a little bit more substantive in nature, but more or less this is more administrative. I know it's a little bit more than that, but do yourself a favor, point to where all this information is.
Sorry, this might be one of those cases where you might want to get a third party or someone that's just not intimately familiar, because you might think you covered patient contact materials in your device description, but somebody else working at it might say, well, not really.
It's true. So once you get through the kind of that RTA hurdle, now it goes into the substantive review. So if this were a paper file, pile of paper, so to speak, that you submitted as part of your 510K, what I've heard from 510K reviewers, don't spend any money on fancy binding. You know, binding is that like some sort of three-ring binder, or you do the spiral about. Don't do that, because the first thing they're going to do is they're going to rip it off. And they're going to divvy up sections to the different people. Like the biocompatibility section is going to go to this person, and electromagnetic compatibility is going to go to that person, and so on. So they're going to divvy this up. And then that's part of the rules, so to speak, behind the e-copy version, is that it has to be structured and formatted in a certain way, because it's probably going to be more than one person that's going to be reviewing your 510K. It's going to be divvied up based on subject matter expertise. And this is actually where FDA in general is moving, is more of subject matter expertise. I've heard some early word that FDA inspections normally have been based on district office. The FDA, like I'm in Indiana. Indiana is part of the Detroit district, and that's, if all the companies that are in that district, well, all the inspections will be operated out of that office. But I'm hearing that even inspections are going to become more subject matter based. So if you have a product that's a biologic, your inspector is probably going to be an expert in biologics rather than somebody that's based in the Detroit district. So just keep that in mind as you start to put this together. It's possible that, you're going to get some sort of feedback, some sort of question, some sort of communication. I know there are cases where 510Ks have had no questions. I think those are rare birds. I guess I know there were a couple hands that had 510Ks from start to finish happen in under 90 days. Anybody ever have a 510K not have any questions? Yeah? Awesome. Figure out what his secret was. I don't know what it was. So, but that's a very rare thing. And now, it could happen with like abbreviated and with special 510Ks. Traditional 510Ks, it's rare. So expect questions. You will have some questions. And just be prepared to answer them. Now, at some point in time, and if the back and forth happens, you could be told, hey, like Juan Carlos said, provide response. We're not going to have this back and forth. We're not going to be wasting FDA's time. If you can't answer the questions in one pass, then we'll issue an NSE.
And a lot of these questions come with deadlines, so it's not unusual to get a question, say, and the reviewer says I need an answer by end of business 4 o'clock or on Friday. So during that review time, make sure you have your team, your subject matter experts available. Keep them in the loop as to what's going on, so they're ready to basically drop everything and help you answer these questions. And just like everything else, you got to answer these questions substantially. You're not just to be able to throw something over the fence and hope that they get tired.
Yeah, and you're going to get a list of questions. I've seen it where sometimes they just send it in the mail to you, but I've also seen where the reviewer will email you directly, and they will also mail it. But when you get it directly, spend some time to understand what those questions are, and do it fairly quickly, because sometimes I had a reviewer once send me questions, and then a couple days later, we were still evaluating the question, but a couple days later called me. Said, hey, it was like Friday at 3 p.m. Said, hey, is there any chance that you can give me an answer by 4 p.m.? I'm going on vacation next week, or we got this conference, or whatever. And if you can help answer this, then we can get this one taken care of. And so we did, and it helped. So do interact with your reviewer. Spend some time understanding the questions, but ask for clarification, because it's possible that the information that is being asked of that question may, in fact, have already been provided. And just because they asked a question doesn't mean that it just means that they didn't find what they were looking for. But there are other times where the question, you're like, this doesn't make sense, or it doesn't apply to my product, and that sort of thing. So build that dialogue, that communication, get a clear understanding from the FDA. Remember that they're seeing everything for your type of product coming through their gate. You know, they're the gatekeeper, so to speak. So there's probably a reason they're asking the question.
And you do have the opportunity to request an in-submission issue meeting, which basically is either a teleconference or face-to-face. If it's really something that's just you asking eye to eye with the reviewer, you can request that. And I wouldn't do this lightly, and probably just wouldn't do it, but you could also just go to the office level and say, hey, this is we're at impasse, our clinical experts are saying this, your clinical experts are saying Y, can you help mitigate this issue?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you have the FDA targets, what they targeted for the 510K? What was the number actually for the number of days?
I think I have that too. I don't know if I have all. I think I have it on a slide here in a moment.
Okay.
I'll share that with you. So after the substantive interaction, then now we're in that period where the last few days theoretically are happening from the FDA clock standpoint. And usually by the time you submit your answer, you should have a pretty good feeling of whether or not you're going to get clearance or not. You probably know if you're not, I would say. You have a pretty good feeling based on that interaction. Now, if you just answered the question and threw it over the wall and didn't interact with your reviewer, you don't know. So interact. Contact your reviewer. Get clarification. They will talk to you. They will answer your phone call. They will answer your emails. They want your 510K. They want to understand what your 510K is all about and make sure that you're addressing the concerns. Now, not substantially equivalent. What does that mean? You're going to have to start over. So nobody wants that. I mean, I know some of you raised your hand that you're doing a 510K because, you're trying to get products to market, of course, but it is an important milestone for your company. It relates to additional funding. So, I mean, nothing will be worse than getting an NSE letter from that perspective. So you asked, now this doesn't have, I apologize, it's a little bit dated, but this gives you some idea about the average calendar days for traditional 510K. Now, calendar days and FDA days aren't not the same thing per se, so just keep that in mind. I would say there was a period, and I wish I had the past couple of years, but I would say the past couple of years are pretty consistent with around the 120-ish days standpoint. Emergo actually has a report that they usually publish that you can find that data pretty well. I think actually maybe on FDA, but website too, but FDA website's a little bit trickier to navigate from a usability standpoint. But you should expect somewhere around 120 days or so. I usually advise a new startup developing a product that's going to go the 510K path. It's not inconceivable that total elapsed time could be 6 to 9 months. I'm a project manager and I like buffer when I manage projects. Now, Juan Carlos and Liz may tell you, John's crazy, it's way faster, and they probably have a good reason for that. So I'll let them share some of that, how it can be faster in a moment. It's pretty standard, so I feel like I'm missing something here. Oh, so that it's a good day on your 510K when they start asking for you to update your 510K summary. Because the 510K summary is what is going to be on their website, FDA website, for your product. So when they're starting to ask you to make some adjustments to your 510K summary, at least my experience is that means we're at the last little bit of this 510K submission. So that's actually a good thing. And I'm telling you, the words matter. So just keep that in mind. The words do matter. Indications for use. Sometimes that little words make a big difference. So if you have a very specific business reason for a little word that FDA is trying to get you to change, that's probably something to evaluate and to discuss. But there's probably a very specific reason why they're asking. As Juan Carlos said a moment ago, sometimes reviewers are trying to steer you towards 510K rather than de novo and that sort of thing. So try to understand the motivation behind that. You're going to get a whole letter. Could be for all sorts of reasons. They're going to tell you what it is, why they're doing it. This is not a public domain letter, so this is not going to be Freedom of Information Act. They're telling you what the problem is, why they feel it's a problem, and they're not going to tell you what you need to do to correct it, but they're going to give you some information and guidance about that. Here's an example. Let me go to the highlighted version, just to give you some example. Like the biocompatibility topic is one that's common where people try to make a rationale that, oh, well, this material already exists and it's on this product and that product and so on. So you kind of get the gist of what might be a deficiency type of letter from this particular example. A few tips. Talked about the I promise pieces earlier. If your product has patient contact materials and components, know about biocompatibility, and more importantly, do the proper biocompatibility testing for those materials. Corroborate it, do the risk assessment, leverage experts in biocompatibility if you want to build that case as to why. If you have an electronic device, guess what? IEC 60601 is testing to that standard. It's going to be an expected behavior. So do yourself a favor and do that before you do submission. I know these seem like simple things from an advice standpoint. Another thing is shelf life has been an area that I've seen come under more and more scrutiny from an FDA standpoint. If you are making a shelf life claim about your product, like a terminally sterilized device often has a shelf life. You may state, 3 years from date of sterilization or something like that. You need to have evidence to corroborate that. And make sure that if a common path is accelerated aging, make sure that your accelerated aging, basically you validated or corroborated that aging relates to real-time aging. So just support that. All right. Certain forms in like 3601 to 3514, 3654, these are all standard forms that FDA has established for their different purposes. And I know it seems silly, but FDA reviewers are people too. Their job isn't to try to kill your startup. That's not really what they're after. Now they may be having a bad day. I had a reviewer that had a bad day, and I was being a dick, and I probably made it worse. So don't do that, okay? So be nice. Just be nice. Any questions? General questions about high-level 510K process before we dive into some of the more specific? Yes.
Two quick questions. One is, if you're the manufacturer doing your 510K, at what point should you register your establishment?
Sure. So question is, getting ready to do a 510K, when do I need to register? So first product I'm bringing to market, and I need to pay a fee as part of the 510K. So when do I pay my establishment registration fee, which is a different thing. So there's a fee for my submission, and then there's an annual fee for being a medical device company that's established. So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I pay the user fee for the 510K at time of 510K submission, but I don't pay the establishment registration fee until I get clearance and go to market. So that's a downstream thing. All right, good question.
Also, another quick one.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about 510K ownership?
510K ownership.
You said you had patents. You can actually have a 510K, but not have different manufacturers.
Sure. I'm sure you both have some thoughts on this too. 510K ownership. Analogous to like IP ownership and how to
transfer it from one entity to another.
That's part of the question. What's the overall ownership regulation, if you will, in terms of 510K?
It's a good question.
So when you're commercializing a product, that obviously has to have a 510K, right? That went with it. That usually follows the product license, right? That specific product. The only, other than the clearance letter, there's not much of a value behind. It's not like a PMA where you can reference, you can cross-reference, you can create a history file and use that, and it actually has commercial value to other people. I don't know if there's much value to the actual 510K documentation, and it's all subject to FOI minor redaction anyway. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I was just thinking in terms of, I mean, not anybody can just jump on your 510K.
That's right. 510K is for you as the submitter based on the evidence that you provided. It's not like somebody else can say, oh, well, I make something similar, so I can just piggyback on their 510K. I mean,
so let's say the 510K submitter was the import. So the manufacturers can only, that's only of use to them.
Right.
If they're going through you as the import.
Right. So the question is, the person who submitted the 510K is also the importer, right? So again, the 510K submission is proof and evidence that this product is substantially equivalent to something else. So I need to have the appropriate testing and activities and that proof to demonstrate that. FDA isn't checking, do you own the IP? They didn't check that, right? But you prepare one of the documents is a truthful and accuracy statement that you are the owner and the proprietor, and this is the information you're providing is truthful and accurate. But it is sometimes people liken a 510K to a patent because they have this IP. It is, in a manner of speaking, it is sort of kind of a form of IP. Now, can I license that 510K, the rights to that 510K to other entities on my behalf? And it's tricky because if I license it to you, part of my 510K, I have proposed labeling. And part of the 510K now requires UDI aspects of that too. And so if I'm licensing it to you, are you putting your name on it or are you putting my name on it? And if you're putting your name on it, now that proposed labeling part of a 510K theoretically is different. And there are ways to be able to do private label and that sort of thing that can be a little bit smoother and others that can be a little bit trickier. So it really depends on what is being changed when I license the rights to this to you. Is it just a label change and a name change? This is where using that 510K decision tree flowchart that's in the guidance document can be helpful. Because if you're changing nothing but the name, then I may be able to do that. But if you're starting to change the indications for use, then it gets a little bit tricky. It's a good question. It's a tricky question, but it's a good question. Yes, sir.
I have a similar tricky question. So let's say we've got a product, we have a patent on it. The patent's about to expire. We get a 510K. We take it to market. But now can someone else use our device as a predicate device and get a 510K, copy our idea after the patent is expired?
Yes. Short answer, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
At what point you have to repay the 510K fee? For example, if you get NSE, do you have to go through the process and repay the fee?
So the question is, so the question is, if you go through the 510K, you had to pay your fee for your 510K at the beginning of the 510K process. You go through and you get a non-substantial equivalence letter, NSE letter. Do you get your money back? No, you don't get your money back. Do you have to, if you go through the 510K process, do you have to pay again? Yes, you have to pay again.
You cannot modify.
No. Because that money is basically buying the reviewer, or paying the reviewer's time during that process.
That's why you really want to make sure that any lingering questions that might be in your file, you can resolve in 180 days. Otherwise, the time expires, you'll get your SE letter, and you're starting from day one.
Yeah, you start from day one, and you start the whole process again. Yes?
So going back to your comment about the quality management system in the 510K, I mean, when you're submitting a 510K, how much of your quality management system should be in place? And, there's the sort of things where you can get someone to write it out for you for a certain good fee, or you could have a comprehensive quality management system.
Sure. The relationship between a quality management system and my 510K. So I'm gonna answer the question because if you're already an established company, you should already have your quality system in place. But if you're a startup, you may not. So if you're a startup, how much of your quality system do you need to have in place while you're going through design and development during the 510K and so on? So if you're in product development, I'm a big fan of, I call it bootstrapping your quality management system. What does that mean? Well, if you're in design and development, you're going to need design controls, you're going to need risk, you're probably going to need supplier management, and you're going to need document management. So establish those 4 pieces of your quality management system as soon as you're in product development. And then as you progress toward your submission, there may be other parts and pieces that are appropriate. There may be some things that you need to do from like a manufacturing standpoint and so on. So you may start to turn on other parts and pieces of your quality system. But by the time, and then you submit your 510K, and now you can finalize the rest of that quality system so that by the time you get the clearance letter, you build it as you go, build it as you need. Yeah.
Can you say those for me?
Design control, risk management, supplier management, document management. At a bare minimum.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Yes?
I want to touch on how consensus standards for the 510Ks tie into how you set your design controls.
Can you ask your question in a slightly different way?
Like how do people should look at what the FDA consensus standards are when you're doing your design controls, so those would be your driving requirements for your product.
Okay.
And how is the FDA tying that into the 510Ks these days?
Yeah. Okay, so everybody knows. So we're going to make an assumption that that our product is a 510K.
Right.
Okay. So with that assumption, we know there is an 800 series dot number, like 878.5628 number. Do you all know I'm talking about the regulation number that applies to my product? Am I speaking? Some of you are looking at me like I'm bullshit later. Okay. So there is a regulation that now my product fits under, and within that regulation, there are 3-letter product codes that apply, and it's all based on what I claim my product does. Okay. So when I know what that is or the possibilities for that, then I can look on the FDA website and I can identify, or Right Submission Platform apparently has a better UI, much better UI. But I can look for what standards or guidances or information apply to that particular regulation or a particular product code. Now, it's not every product regulation has something, but many do. And so if I just discover, oh, wow, this cardiovascular guidance document is now applicable to my product based on its regulation and indication for use, now I think this is where you're going. Now I can go to that guidance document and I can read through that guidance document, and it may say, for this type of device that you need to do this test or this is a requirement. So it helps you define the design control activities, the product development activities that you need to do during the course of development.
And is the FDA checking for those during the 510K? They used to do more of it. I'm not sure if they're still doing this much.
It depends on the region, it depends on the product a lot. If there are consensus standards that apply to your specific product code, absolutely. But in general, not as much as you think.
Okay, I can probably do this. So we're just going to switch over here. And we'll just sort of give you guys a quick overview of what it looks like through our software. As we mentioned at the beginning, we also have a clinical evaluation report and clinical study report version of our software, but we'll just focus on the 510K for today. So we saw some of these, what we call nodes, in one of John's slides. Very similar. We have a little bit of a different order, but I will just first show you sort of the wow moment here in your exports tab. You download our full submission, the software page numbers everything for you, builds a table of contents, hyperlinks that table of contents, manages all the attachments. As John mentioned, the e-copy naming conventions is even, you need to have a 001 underscore as the sort of file extension.
Before you dive too deep, Liz, so I'm just curious, have any of you actually compiled a 510K? You put together all the pages, the formatting. So do you mind sharing how long did it take you just for that piece?
I mean, just everything, like you're talking just the paperwork after it's already
Just
signed? Or?
Just putting everything in the right order, putting the page numbers, putting the tab. How long did it?
I mean, 30, 40 hours. I mean, it can
30,
be
40
its own,
hours.
just like this admin piece and like building everything in, dialing in the PDFs and, bookmarking and,
Would you like to have 30 to 40 hours of time back in the next 510K?
Absolutely.
So that is, one of the huge advantages to this software is it does take that 30, 40 hours of administrative work out, allows you to focus on value-add work. We have your attachments here. We've built electronic signatures into the software, so no need to really print anything at all. You just sign electronically within the software, and it's time-stamped. This computer is a little bit tricky to navigate here. So yeah, in your 510K letter, cover letter, you have an electronic signature there. And as we alluded to earlier, we have built this sentence, and the e-copy is an exact duplicate of the paper copy, except only the cover letter and cover sheet have been printed. So as long as you have that statement or a similar statement in your cover letter, that sort of eliminates the need to print out.
So for the gentleman that volunteered 30 to 40 hours, is your role regulatory?
Yes, I'm Dallas, by the way.
Yeah.
Based on the phone.
All right, Dallas. So Dallas, in a role at regulatory, let me speculate and correct what I missed from this state. But I'm guessing the engineers, the product development team, throws a pile of things over the wall at some point in time, somewhere around verification, validation, for you, the regulatory person, to then try to construct and work a miracle.
Right. I mean, I've worked in industry as well as consulting now, but yes. And so even sometimes there's definitely, test protocols, reports, all the verification, validation data, biocompatibility, sterilization, on down the list. So,
right.
And then it's up to us to, compile it into some sort of a summary and bring it into the 510K.
I mean, we're in an information age, and so Liz, you did a webinar. We did a webinar. Gosh, I guess it's a couple months ago, and you talked a lot about we're in an era where some of the standard practices, the conventional wisdom, is wrong, and we're building stories about our products, about our processes based on key data elements and information, and we're losing a lot of valuable time. We're losing a lot of valuable information because of our conventional approach to these things. And maybe if you could speak a little bit to kind of that story about, because I've had a chance to talk to the two of you, and I understand whole hog what right submission is all about and the value prop. It's going to give Dallas 30 to 40 hours back, but it's going to be way more than that, because you're going to start building this story from the beginning.
Yeah, that's exactly the premise, right? So if you click back to the software, it creates a platform where the engineers, the sterilization, the regulatory, the quality people can all log on, see what each other is doing, edit each other's work as permissions allow, and build the submission together versus waiting for the last minute and having 20 disjointed documents being thrown together. It creates a ton of visibility.
Does it make them log in?
Inadvertently it does, because it shows them the activity log. There's an activity log, so you can see which of your colleagues have logged on and have done something in the system. So it creates a lot of transparency in the system that's not there now.
Sure.
There's sort of also a comments feature, so very similar to a Word comment feature. So you can reply to a comment, and it's not on this screen here, but when someone adds a comment, it will show up on the activity feed. There's a nice, I'll just click into sort of the device description section, project workflow, so you can finalize the section, and that sort of grays it out. It doesn't allow it to be edited. Signals to others that you work with, stop editing for editing's sake. We've also, as John alluded to, there are a lot of FDA guidance documents out there, so we've highlighted the specific section of the guidance that is applicable to this section, may or may not be super helpful. So we've also provided some instructions in these blue text boxes as well to guide you a little bit further.
I think I remember what I wanted to say earlier. We're heading to a point where structured data and regulatory information management systems are going to be mandated. In the drug space, it's already there in terms of you have to submit an XML file that is loaded into their databases. FDA CDRH is trying to figure out how to do that. They're not the quickest organization. Actually, when we showed this to the group at FDA, Patrick Axel said with their e-submission tour, he said, "Well, this is what we wanted to build, but you know, we're the government." Well, they'll get there, right? They'll get to a point where with your e-copy, you're submitting a structured data set that's going to contain your indications for use, your product name, your address, all that information. Because right now, some poor person that's a document mail center, go to the pools of your submission and start typing away the key fields. And that gets transmitted to a Word document, and then you set up. That gets transmitted to a Word document that the reviewer uses to do the workflow. It's called Smart Template. In a few years, you're going to be forced to use software to build your submissions, and then you're going to have structured data throughout your whole organization, from your quality system to ours to your promotional materials, and everything's going to sync up.
I mean, we're already seeing it, like as Juan Carlos mentioned, we're already seeing it in the pharmaceutical industry. In med device, we're already seeing it when it comes to clinical trial data management. I mean, there's certain requirements. Electronic data capture, I know that was one of the topics that Liz spoke about on a webinar a couple months ago. So it is happening in segments, and Juan Carlos is right that this is, one of the things, dislike, I'm not asking your political opinion about the Trump administration, but it is very clear that even coming into office that there were going to be changes to the FDA. When it comes to getting products to market and across the board. Now, initially the focus from an FDA perspective seemed to be squarely in pharmaceutical, and some of the device things have been kind of behind the scenes, and we started to get a sneak peek at some of this back in, I think it was December, and I don't know what has happened since, but there was something that was published on the FDA website about a quicker path, an alternative path to 510K. And what does that mean? We don't know exactly what that means yet, except that I can bet a lot of assurance that providing information to them in a much more succinct, organized fashion is going to help any of our causes. So just keep that in mind.
I'll just give you one example. So we've talked a lot about your indications for use statement. In our cover sheet node here, we have, as we mentioned earlier, you do have your indications for use in the cover sheet, which is here. So we recommend that you start with this part of the submission. A typical submission, you might do this cover sheet last. But this is a lot of information that you put into this cover sheet is going to auto-populate into further sections. One of this is the indications for use statement. So here you have your indications for use, and this is what we like to call a token. So the trade name is also a token. So if you enter this trade name in this format, it's going to insert whatever you have written above here.
So do you remember how I was sharing with you earlier that the indications for use, I think Liz and I added up, and what did we come up with, 4 or 5 different points? So that indication for use becomes a token, right? So you manage that data element in one spot, and the right submission platform knows everywhere where to put that token. So you get adherence or approval or everyone on your team to know, hey, yeah, this is our indication for use. You don't have to go figure out everywhere that it is in your submission. You go to where the token is, and you manage that information there under control. So it just makes life easier.
Sorry if I came in a little bit late, but does this bypass eSubmitter, or do you still have to go through eSubmitter?
Not yet. So you still have to submit a copy, download a copy, burn it to a disk, and mail that to a cover letter.
Oh, okay.
We're working on it, yeah.
So yeah, that indications for use statement. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
If we go to our indications for use statement form, it's already populated here for you. You can't edit it here. It'll link you back to that cover sheet. But if we download this form, it automatically inserts all this information into FDA's indications for use form. And the cover sheet works the same way. It populates FDA's PDF form.
So, I pointed out all the guidance documents and where you can go from an FDA website to find this and that and so on. So, it's gonna not do it justice, but part of what Right Submission has built is an interface that keeps you compliant and ahead of the curve for current expected best practices when it comes to compiling your FDA. We're going to give you the time back and just the menial, mind-numbing, non-value add formatting that Dallas was so kind to share. They've built in ways to evaluate predicates and regulations and product codes and understanding some of the consensus standards. It's all in a single source of truth for your 510K related activities. So it's, as I told you once upon a time, and I wanted the button to be able to do all of the things. And I mean no disrespect, but they have made it look so simple and elegant. And I assure you, if you've ever put together a 510K, I used to charge a lot of money to do 510Ks. I'm not going to put Dallas on the spot. But I know he charges a lot of money to do 510Ks.
Not that much.
Not that much. All right, well, we can figure out what not that much is. But what if you could do it for a fraction of the cost? What if, Dallas, you could do it for a fraction of the cost, and you can do value added. Let's just be smarter with our time. I mean, goddamn, I'm an engineer. I'm smart. I like to work on engineering stuff, not just trivial, mind-numbing, non-value added.
I work for ZSX Medical. My name is Jesse Butch, and I didn't speak with Juan Carlos before this, but we've worked with Juan Carlos for a long time. And I'm just going to kind of give him a plug here because we just used this software to file our first 510K 2 weeks ago, and the process took about 2 months. We had one project manager internal to our organization who was like the point man for compiling the 510K, who's never put a 510K together before in his life. He's only worked 3 years in the industry, and I mentioned it only took about 2 months, and there were just a couple other members on the internal team. So it's really terrific software, and I know these guys are up here, and you might think this is their product, and they're going to try to sell me on it, but it really is a terrific product from live customer reviews. So just wanted to add that in here.
Good to see you, Jesse. Thank you.
Welcome.
So any projections for PMA submission?
Yeah. It's on our development plan. We're more eager. So just about every product we build with a use case in mind. So we've had someone come and say, hey, we're open to this idea. Let's build it together. And we'd much rather do that versus us just build something that's not quite right. So we're very much open to, if you've got a few coming, let's chat.
So this looks amazing from not having to go through and check all those things by hand, which has become part of my job as an engineer. But how do you incorporate engineering drawings, pictures, things like that? It looks just like text boxes.
So the question is, there are files, drawings, specifications, other information. I'm going to restate your question for everybody else to hear, just in case you didn't hear it. How does this platform allow you to incorporate drawings, specifications, other supporting material as part of your 510K? Is that the gist of the question?
So in sections where you would need to upload a device drawing, like the device description, the software allows you to add an image, add a text box, you can import a table, an HTML, you can add a table. So the software we've built in a lot of flexibility for you to sort of build your story as works for your device. And we also do the same for attachments, so when you need to upload your device labeling, within that device labeling section, there's a PDF upload, and then the software automatically numbers and for tables and figures as well. So if you go back and add a figure, earlier in the section, it will automatically adjust the table or figure numbering for any subsequent.
Clarify what the output is?
Yes, of course.
E-copy's ready to go?
E-copy is ready to go. So it's this PDF file that is bookmarked, it is hyperlinked, page number, know the nomenclature of the e-copy is you just run this to a CD and print out the first 15 or so pages and submit that with the CD.
So you get a PDF has everything. So you just have to print that out, and put it on your CD.
Yep.
And that's it.
That's it.
So, for those of you who didn't hear the gentleman's question, basically what this platform does is it prepares your 510K, the PDF, everything that you need to have from an e-copy standpoint. It's ready to go. You don't need to do anything further. It's already formatted, dialed in, paginated, named, all those sorts of things. So I know some of you shared that you've done this before, and I used to quote putting together a 510K could easily take, you said 30 to 40 hours. You must be better than me. I used to say about 100 hours.
I would also focus not only on the time that you're saving, but what you're doing with the additional time and brain power. It really makes a difference. If you're not thinking about, okay, I'm writing the session, I gotta keep track of my table numbers, right? That means you're thinking about the strategy and the precise writing, so that cognitive load that we keep hearing about, why automation is important. It really shifts your cognitive load from silly things like page numbers to very important things such as strategy and safety and efficacy of a product.
So, just to clarify,
yes.
30 to 40 was what she was asking about, just the admin piece.
Yeah, just the admin piece. Right.
Between 30 and 100 hours, somewhere there, right there.
All right, so we may be standing in front of you between your lunch and whatever you got going on next. And I know that today's topic was about 510K and design controls and risk and that sort of thing. And we talked a little bit about all of these sorts of things. I wanted you to understand this platform. As I told you at the beginning of the session, when Joe said, "Hey, we need somebody to take this topic," I jumped up and down and said, "Absolutely, I'll do it." On one exception, that Liz and Juan Carlos were part of this as well, because I've seen the product and I've worked with the companies that have used it, and I know it's making a difference. But you all came here for a reason. You all have specific questions. Have you all asked your specific questions on this particular topic?
Just a quick question. What's the percentage of 510Ks that actually get approved? Is there data for this, or?
Well, there's a percentage that says that it's a bit of a moving target. It depends. I can't remember if it's every quarter or every month, but there's some frequency that 70 to 75% get rejected, but they usually go back through the cycle. So eventually most 510Ks will get cleared. I don't remember. I don't know if you know how many get NSE letters.
Right. The numbers are really hard to follow because different divisions will strongly encourage you to withdraw it. So at the start, you might want to withdraw it and not get that NSE letter because that's a disclosable event to your investors versus, hey, we talked to FDA, they gave us some more feedback, we're going to rework our submission. It's better story than, hey, we got an NSE.
Yes, thanks for all this great information. Any particular advice for a device that would create a new category, something that's a big leap in technology and so forth?
So you're like de novo? Is that what you're thinking?
Something that is not can be categorized under existing technology.
Okay. Sure. So the question is there any device where there's no existing regulation? It doesn't appear as though 510K is a viable path. What do you do? Is that a fair summation of your question?
Well, I mean, it's more to do if my understanding is you have to go to 510K. It's your only option. So if your device creates a new category of a medical device, something that doesn't really exist, like in my instance, a new type of completely revolutionary type of cardiovascular catheter.
Right.
It uses a new technology. It's disruptive. There's nothing really you can compare it to. It's not tweaking an existing technology.
Right.
So I've read some things about creating a new category requires some specific documents and obviously some greater scrutiny by the FDA.
Sure. So I'll give a few tidbits and left or right we'll add to. So usually terms like revolutionary, innovative, never been done before, and 510K don't go together. If there's no product code, there's no regulation, nothing exists that relates to the indications for use of your product, de facto US FDA makes that a class 3 product. De facto for a class 3 product means that you have the PMA as the pathway for something that does not have a regulation or a product code. Now, with that being said, there are a few mechanisms. Maybe you think because it's a cardiovascular catheter, granted it's revolutionary and unique, but there are other similar risk type profile products that are on the market. You may petition. There's a couple of vehicles. You may do a 513G request for classification with the FDA. You may do a pre-submission. You may do a de novo application, and all of those could lead down various different paths. But de novo could eventually come back to FDA. Can look at that and say, yes, this is new, novel, unique. There is no regulation. We're going to create a new category, a new regulation, a new code around that, new standards, new requirements, and things of that nature. And then they may come back and say your path to get clearance is through a de novo 510K. So they may come back and say, no, this is a PMA. So there's a lot of different ways that this could go depending on the risk of your product. So I just rambled for a bit, so I'll hand on Mike.
It may or may not be related to your product, but I would also keep some distance between your marketing folks and regulatory. You start using terms like unique, novel, revolutionary. You could be a 510K every day of the week, except the day that the reviewer checks your website and sees these terms and says, I'm not dealing with this, and goes to a de novo or a PMA. So especially for startups, be very careful. It's extremely common for FDA to review your website just to get a better understanding of what your device is. If you have claims or indications on your website that don't align with what you're just told FDA your product is, it's going to create a disconnect. So have a US or OUS part of your website, or just be careful about that.
What about if you are, like in that case, even though it's a unique concept or idea or design, it still could have like a similar intended use to something already in the market, or there's other rules and regulations to like not just equivalence being it's exactly You're
exactly right.
Yeah.
John briefly had the decision tree, the FDA 510K decision tree. The first question is it the same indication for use? Yes. Is there a legally marketed product? That's the predicate. Yes. And then you get to other technological differences that raise new questions of safety and effectiveness. That's where your performance data can answer why. There's 3,500 applications, 510K applications a year. There's not 3,500 need-to devices. Every device is different, in some dimension. Yet they all get cleared. 75% get cleared. So I think there's just a differentiation in thinking in terms of the process that needs to take place.
Yes, sir.
I have a little bit of information to share on your question. So the company that I work for makes a mobile app that reads diagnostic tests. And I'm not our regulatory person, but the FDA did not have a classification for mobile apps, but we fell under software. And so we follow those rules. Now the only minor problem is that over the past 5 years that's changed a little bit as the FDA has gotten more experience with mobile apps. But as the speakers and others have said, they just forwarded us into software. Okay, follow these rules. And it probably will continue to change a little bit. But the FDA had a plan and figured it out, and we worked very well with that.
So are we addressing your question, sir, about,
Yeah, it's pretty, I'll have to research it, but it's a good starting point. I appreciate it.
All right, so there's a gentleman in the back of the room. Mike, will you raise your hand? So, no, it's you. No. So if you have questions about like creative, innovative approaches from a regulatory strategy standpoint and how it relates to different pathways to get clearance or approval or what have you, it's worth a 5-minute conversation with Mike.
Or just come back this afternoon after lunch.
Or just come back after lunch.
I'm in this room.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank Juan Carlos, Serna, and Les FitzGerald for kind of bailing me out a little bit because they I didn't give them a lot of time to prepare for today, and I just said, no, come talk, and so I want to thank them. But thank you all for your great questions as we explore this topic of 510K. And if you want the slides, I don't know the exact protocol, but at the risk of you not getting the information that you want, if you want the slides for what we went through today, will you do me a favor? Will you just give me your card, or if you jotted down the contact information earlier, or Liz or Juan Carlos, just reach out to us. If you want more information about right submission, you can certainly reach out to the two of them. You guys are here today, right? So do find them today. But otherwise, we'll let you go get some food or whatever's next on your agenda. So thank you.